Hello everyone and welcome to our latest Innovation for Nonprofits webinar. I'm Lisa and I lead on our marketing and events at Torchbox, and I am very excited about today's session because we're going to explore something that is transforming how we all work, so artificial intelligence and its role in accelerating innovation, especially for nonprofits. But before we jump in, let me introduce your speakers for today. So I am joined by Andy Gordon, who's a principal innovation designer at Torchbox, and his experience spans strategic foresight, innovation strategy, and transformation. And he's supported organizations like Macmillan and PepsiCo and HP, both in-house and agency side. And we have Ed Baldry, our Director of Innovation with great hair. Sorry, I wasn't going to mention your hair, but I've done it, sorry. Who drives innovation for us at Torchbox and also all of our clients. And he's also worked across the private and public nonprofit sectors with large organizations like Dyson, Google, and the UN. And we're also delighted to have Tom Dyson joining us today as our special guest. And Tom is one of our co-founders at Torchbox and our CTO, and he can draw on his years of experience leading our tech team on high-profile projects for organizations like Greenpeace and Oxfam and NASA. So in terms of what we've got planned for you today, we're going to cover the fundamentals of AI and innovation and walk through a practical model for AI-powered innovation. And we'll share some real-world examples that hopefully we can all learn from. Then we're going to move into what I think will be a really interesting panel discussion where we can explore questions and challenges together. So if you have got some questions for our speakers, pop them in the Q&A or the chat and I'll try and keep track of them. And then we will ask them all as part of the panel discussion. Thank you to everyone that sent me over a few questions before the session today as well. So it's going to be a two-part event, and we will wrap up by 3 p.m, if not slightly before. I will share the recording in a follow-up email after, as well as any of the resources that we reference. Right, let's get started. I will hand over to you, Andy.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Lisa. So I'd like to start with saying I think it's fair to say that we live in the age of automation, right? So everything from surgical robots to taxis are becoming increasingly automated, but it's not all of these kind of progressive and maybe not widely adopted use cases. It's also in our everyday. So if you think about Netflix, automatically recommending shows based on your behaviors, but also in the sector, right? So email campaigns, donation management, social media scheduling, they're all increasingly being automated. So it's probably no surprise that we now have an increase in autonomous AI agents as well. These agents are intelligent AI systems that can perceive their environment, make decisions, and take actions based on a specific outcome or goal. So organizations like Salesforce, Microsoft, and even Anthropic Claude have all been releasing different versions of this for all sorts of different use cases. So basically, we've now got agents that can do jobs and autonomously. And I want to bring one of those examples to life with a short video. So this is computer use by Claude. You won't hear any sound on this. I'll talk you through it. But just to really highlight where we are. So Anthropic computer use is a feature introduced by Anthropic, funnily enough, enabling AI to interact with a computer's desktop, right? So an environment similar to a human would. So in this example, a person's given instructions through a prompt. So let me just play it for you. So the prompt is, please navigate to a new Chrome window, open Claude, and once loaded, create a personal website with a 90s style theme. So what you're seeing on the left-hand side here are the instructions and what's actually happening and explaining what it's doing. And on the right-hand side, you can see this is completely AI controlling this computer desktop. So it's writing a prompt. It even knows that it's talking to itself. So it's a website for yourself in a 90s style theme. If anyone that's used Claude will be familiar with this, but what it's doing is it's working through and actually writing the code for that website. And in a matter of seconds, it's created that website on the right-hand side. Don't know about you, but when I saw that, it felt pretty sci-fi and quite futuristic. But again, I think it really highlights where we are with some of these technologies. And these type of advancements impact and have spillover effects for innovation. So we're seeing a third wave of innovation emerge, albeit probably led by the private sector. But I think there's lots that we can learn in the non-profit sector as well. So traditionally, the first wave of innovation, I nearly said AI then, first wave of innovation was analog, right? So this was humans, very manual. I remember when I first started my career, it was all pens, pencils, sketching stuff, and working through that way. We then was augmented, so humans with machines. So with the rise of computers, innovation became, for me particularly, it was like CAD software, 3D printing, or using Photoshop and iPad Pro. And then finally, we've got automation now. So the wave that we're in now, so machines that are led by humans. So whether that's automated or semi-automated, and that's driving a lot of innovation today. So we've got AI algorithms that are generating patentable ideas or discovering new protein molecules, or even delivering digital marketing campaigns. And much of this is possible now because of AI advancements, right? So combined with other technological breakthroughs, but also the infrastructure that underpins it. So I'm going to show you a quick example of some of those advancements because I think it's really important in terms of the context of when I pass to Ed to talk through next. So the first one is around capabilities of these models and AI systems. So AI systems now have achieved levels of performance that either match and in some cases supersede human capabilities across a wide range of tasks. So things like reading comprehension, image recognition, pattern spotting. But not only that, which is a big that, but they can also do that at scale, right? And simultaneously in ways that we just couldn't before. So there's a couple of studies, one from Oxford University and another from the Human-Centered Institute of AI at Stanford, both showcasing some of these advancements. The second is a very visceral example, but it's one that we love to show because it really does show the progress. And this one's all around quality. So 18 months ago, if you'd prompted an AI image generator like Midjourney, and you'd ask for an otter using Wi-Fi on an aeroplane, because why would you not ask that? You would get something like you see on the left here. You can barely make out it's a mammal. You can see it's in the sky. You'd have no idea that it's using Wi-Fi. Now, 18 months later, you'll get the image that you see on the right, right? So you can have it animated. You can clearly see it's an otter. The image generator understands that the otter would need to be using a smartphone to connect to the Wi-Fi. And it's just so like the absolute, like, the quality of where we've got to is just mind-blowing. And again, the third is around speed, right? And particularly for us as a digital agency is around the ability to build digital products and artifacts. So say 2-3 years ago, we worked with Resources of the Future to create an interactive tool around the social cost of carbon. And this was interactive data dashboard and an explorer. And that would have taken us weeks, if not months. We would have had to create that manually. On the right-hand side, what you've got is we've created an interactive dashboard on the impact of COVID-19 on our cancer services. And it took me less than 3 prompts and a matter of minutes to be able to create that. And I have no coding or engineering skills at all. So this all means that the cost and time of design, engineering, and innovation is decreasing. So we're increasingly able to create things quicker, better quality, and with less resources than before. So I showed you Claude's computer use earlier. That currently costs about $20 an hour to run. So it's quite expensive. It's inaccessible for most use cases. But actually, if we follow the trajectory of how some of these other AI models have reduced their costs, we'd be looking at probably $2 an hour by this time next year. And we also anticipate that the quality and capabilities of these models is going to, at very least, get incrementally better. So if there's breakthroughs in the space, it could be much, much more than this. But even if we don't, the current capabilities will be impacting us for at least the next decade. If we look to history and other disruptive general purpose technologies, they follow three waves. The first one is all about efficiency, and I think we're probably sick of hearing this by now, and we've all heard it a lot, but everyone is talking about it. So the narrative is driven predominantly by the for-profit world, but we focus on the same way of doing things, but faster and cheaper. The second is around quality, so similar ways of doing things, but better quality outcomes. Then, funnily enough, we try and make those more efficient and work through. It's quite incremental. And then finally, it's the completely new or new possibilities. So we reimagine the ways of doing things to get better outcomes, resulting in innovations and outcomes that weren't possible before. So that's disruptive or breakthrough innovation. And this third wave is normally enabled by embodying that technology. And I'll touch on what I mean by that in a moment. But that doesn't always mean that there aren't early innovators who focus on wave three much sooner as well. So as I mentioned, AI is a general purpose technology. It's often compared to electricity. So if we use that as an example to bring those waves to life. So the first wave, wave one, electricity was primarily adopted to improve efficiency. So for example, streetlights transitioned from gas lamps to electric lamps, and it was faster, more reliable and cheaper. This phase focused on replacing older, quite labor-intensive processes and improving convenience. The second wave, we focused on better quality outcomes. So the telephone system powered by electricity is a really good example here. So telephones replace slower and less reliable communication and offer clearer, more immediate and higher quality comms as well. And then wave three was all around the new possibilities, right? So pretty soon humans figured out how to embody electrical power into objects that no longer needed to continually connected to mains electricity. And the creation of computers, the digital revolution, and entirely new possibilities in information, storage, and communication was possible as a result. I'm going to pass to Ed now to talk a little bit around what all of that means for innovation.
Cool. Thanks, Andy. Cool. Before I jump into autonomous innovation, I think it's actually helpful for us to take a step back. Innovation, Andy mentioned this, right? The for-profit world does things in a different way to the charity sector. And the AI companies are principally targeting that commercial space. In the third sector, we're not interested in quarterly profits or stakeholder value. What charities are working on is arguably far more important. But I think what innovation is trying to achieve with charities can be broken down into 4 areas. It's about increasing income so that charities can afford to take action and they can increase their interventions that improve the world. It's about elevating the experience for beneficiaries, advocates, and supporters. It's about amplifying the impact of the organization. And that might be getting the message across to more people or enabling more people to access a service. And finally, it's about catalyzing change. It's about fixing real-world problems with ingenuity, hard work, and diversity of approaches. So income, experience, impact, and change. But because there's always a but, right? And the but is that the third sector has headwinds to overcome. Working with charities on innovation, we hear these 3 things time and time again. There are never enough people, there is never enough time, and there is never enough money. And that's a real problem for taking innovative approaches, because the traditional approach has always been pretty manual. We workshop, we ideate, and perhaps we can build in faster cycles than a traditional waterfall project, but it still faces limitations in speed, scale, and resource efficiency. Manual processes can be time-consuming and labor-intensive, and it means we can sometimes end up in bad places like first solution thinking or being unable to respond to emerging opportunities simply because they showed up too late in the project. I should stress, I feel like we've just got this slide in every one of the webinars we do, but AI is not a silver bullet. There are well-known risks and limitations, which again, we've talked about in previous sessions, and we certainly don't want to replace humans. We want to augment and amplify. This is about abundance. And by embodying the technology in new ways, we can rethink how we might overcome the limitations we have in resources and the challenges that the sector has. It helps us to do more with less. And we think AI can help us do this in 6 spaces. By introducing automation into the innovation pipeline, we can generate a higher volume of high-quality ideas in less time, rapidly test and iterate on concepts before committing, those valuable resources, identify patterns and insights that might be missed by human analysis alone, free up people's time for high-value strategic activity, stretch limited budgets further by streamlining processes, and even potentially reduce human error and bias in certain circumstances. Oh, skipping ahead. Okay, so what does this actually look like? We are conscious that every organization has a slightly different flavor or approach to innovation. You might have adopted Strategize or the British Design Council, the Pearson product lifecycle, lean startup, whatever, or it will just be something that has organically grown up within your world. For the purpose of today, we're just going to try and abstract this out slightly. And I think what we can all agree on is that innovation shouldn't be a linear process. And I think part of the promise of AI is the fact that we can start to be truly non-linear and cyclical with our processes. So the context of the world and the context of our work is changing throughout the cycle. As people, we are always in the center of these processes. Innovation, design, technology should be inherently human-driven, and they should always be human-driven. And if you've worked with Torchbox on any AI projects, we are frequently talking about how important it is to have a human in the loop. From there, as people, we scan our environments, both internally and externally, for things that are changing. And that might be behaviors of supporters or beneficiaries, new technologies, changes in societies, and we're doing that through things like social listening, data analysis, what have you. We then use that data to make sense of what we are seeing and what we are hearing, and we consider what we've learned and try to think of solutions that can improve or remove things that we have learned about. Self-explanatory, but we build things, right? In innovation, we have to build things and we have to test them. And we are testing them to understand that we can amplify and scale the things that we can see are working. We will invest more money in an ad campaign that's driving large amounts of revenue, or start hiring more team members for a digital service that's increasing charities' impact. And then, of course, because it is a loop, we loop back. Humans, obviously, because innovation has existed for a very long time, can do all of these things. But AI is really starting to catch up. Skipping too far ahead. Right, it's still not great at ideation. It will give you kind of middle of the road things, and amplifying and scaling it could do for the very, the middle of the bell curve stuff. There's some interesting work that's happening in the commercial space here, but certainly wouldn't be appropriate for the third sector yet. But where it becomes really interesting is where we combine human and AI together, and taking advantage of the tools that are on the market and human ingenuity can really amplify our impact and accelerate innovation. Because one of the things that we have is that sometimes we don't have all of the people available that we need. So Jacob Nielsen, web usability pioneer, founder of NNG agency, has noted, to be useful, AI doesn't need to surpass the best human. It only needs to outperform the human you have available, who will, on average, be an average human. Because this ties back to our earlier point that the headwinds we're facing, we never have enough people, we don't have enough time, and we don't have enough money. I'll hand back to Andy.
Thanks very much, Ed. So now, I think this probably speaks for itself, right? But anyone who works in innovation will know it's the human part that's the hardest and the most important. Innovation is way more than a process. It's a culture and mindset. But I do want to reiterate one of the things that Ed mentioned there as well, right? This is not about replacing humans. It's far from it. And I love this quote from I can never pronounce the name correctly, but Fifi Lai, I think, from Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI. And it's all about humans elevating our creativity. But I go further. It's also about the new possibilities that AI presents. So it's to do things better in service of our missions, but it's also that we can do more with less resources. So I think we've got the dominant narrative and framing a little off. So I don't see this as an either or situation. It's the need for humans with deep expertise and understanding how these systems and capabilities of AI can lead to that abundance that Ed talked to earlier. And it's questions like, how might we harness AI alongside our teams to amplify and accelerate our mission in responsible and safe to fail ways? What opportunities does AI present that were previously impossible for us? How can AI help fill critical resource gaps? We've been talking to a lot of our clients about that, and also how we can deliver better outcomes as a result. So it's about both together in service of new possibilities and better outcomes. But one of the things we're acutely aware of and being made aware of, right, is that we're not used to abundance. And this quote from Ethan Mollick is a really important one, right? So people can get stuck in our rivers of thinking when we're using AI systems in a way that reflects us, right? And the way that we work. We can only generate and capture a single idea at once. We all know, I certainly can't, but multitask effectively in the way that we think we can. But AI systems aren't us. It's the ability for AI systems to be doing multiple things simultaneously and at scale that's really important here. That abundance doesn't come without its challenges. We still need to be able to keep up and manage this abundance to ensure humans are in the loop and outcomes are safe, but it does afford us new opportunities. And that allows us to shift from quite linear approaches, so Ed mentioned earlier, to approaches that really are cyclical and simultaneous, right? So we can do multiple things at the same time. But as I mentioned, process is only part of the story. From my experience anyway, we know that the quality of ideas is rarely the determining factor of how ideas or change happens. Anyone working in innovation probably understands that the real hard work often happens behind the scenes or in the hallway conversations, the debates over why this and not that, the storytelling, the relationship building, and the navigating of organizational politics. And these are all the things that AI can definitely not do, but they're often overlooked, right? These soft skills, and I think they're increasingly important. That's why we see it being an ecosystem of AI agents doing particular tasks, all the way from sensing through to scaling, but predominantly doing things that people don't want to do, like automating boring, repetitive tasks, providing the AI systems can do them to the same quality, or doing things that humans can't do as effectively at scale, so such as analyzing vast data sets at speed, predicting complex trends, personalizing experiences at scale, and then finally creating more of the expertise we already have and doing more than we could do in service of our missions. And we believe increasingly it will be us, people, who are the expert guides and creators and conveners, so the stewards of responsibility and ultimate decision-making, those that are empathetic and emotionally intelligent, and really focusing on the connection and people skills. And that's going to require some big shifts from where we are today. And we believe those are going to be, well, the first one, thinking about AI as a tool to managing an ecosystem of human AI agents. Bit of a mouthful, and it feels a bit weird to say that, but genuinely we think it's going to be this is the way that we're going to have to shift from human-only creators. So Ed mentioned earlier, it's like AI is not as creative as humans. There's been multiple different studies showing that AI systems are able to come up with more feasible ideas, but humans are still more imaginative. So I think it's about co-creating with AI and convening and curating some of these outputs. We'll move beyond those linear approaches and shift to more continuous and cyclical innovation processes that can be run simultaneously. From manual and augmented to semi-autonomous and autonomous, but led by people with deep expertise. From siloed and disconnected innovation efforts to more connected and portfolio-led approaches. So we'll be able to do things in parallel, quicker learning loops, and navigate complex challenges better, more systemically, and monitor, learn, and adapt in real time. And then finally, as Ed alluded to earlier as well, is around moving from this resource limited to abundant. It's almost 2 years to the day that ChatGPT was released, I think, if I've got my date correct. And we shared this statement in a webinar shortly after. And the last 2 years have been an absolute roller coaster. It's been trying to keep up has been, it's really, really difficult. But I think it holds true, right? Even if AI doesn't get any better, we are currently afforded new possibilities, and we'll see the spillover effects for decades to come. But there's a temptation to see our roles as passive when they aren't. It's humans that fundamentally make these decisions, but for at least now anyway, and we'll need to do so responsibly and carefully, weighing up both the costs and benefits. So we get to choose how, when, and where we will leverage AI technologies in our own contexts and our own organizations. And every organization is going to have their own culture, values, beliefs, and principles. But I do think there's some fantastic opportunities. Before I pass back to Ed and Tom to talk you through some examples, I wanted to share this quote because I personally love this. It's from a chap called Joseph Weizenbaum. Maybe I've corrected that. But it gets to the heart of my personal beliefs and values, right? Just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should. There are many things that should never be automated and should always be human. And I think we need to be asking those questions. So very quickly, I'll pass across to Ed now to talk a little bit about aiming big and starting small.
Oh, thanks, Andy. So yes, so AI-powered or automated innovation doesn't happen overnight. We've been experimenting with various facets of this in our own custom projects, our own workflows over the last 18 months, and of course, we've been working with clients. And the bit that will not come as a surprise to anyone who has been involved in design, innovation, or technology over the last 20 years is that to get to big things, you want to start with small pieces. So needing to start in safe to fail ways, experimenting, learning, and adapting. So I wanted to take through 2 examples, and then I'll pass across to Tom. I think we mentioned that we've been working with breast cancer now on some AI work, and one of the things that where AI can help is bringing people together, I think, in workshops. We have just been doing some workshops for breast cancer now, and this doesn't sound like a big thing, but actually it is quite a big thing. So we used AI to support us generating stimulus ahead of the workshop. Now, this for an agency is surprisingly time-consuming, and it was a weird shift for Andy and I because doing this sort of data visualization is kind of core of our identity as innovators. But it is far faster to use AI to do it. And similar to the example that Andy showed earlier, creating a dashboard for Cancer Research UK that took minutes rather than days, this was the same thing. So we had the data that we wanted to use. We put that into Claude. We got an artifact from it. We were then able to take that into Photoshop, zoom it up to an A0 print, and then send it to the printers as normal. And where that helped was that it enabled us to have much more stimulus for the workshop and enabled us to make it much richer than we might otherwise have been able to. And the other thing that was beneficial in the workshop was afterwards. Really often in real world workshops, loads of brilliant ideas and content is lost, right? At best, it becomes an inaccessible photo, or it's kind of somewhere in a Miro board. At worst, it literally gets put in the bin because the blue tack has come off during the workshop and it's fallen off the wall. But with AI, we can take advantage of the fact that it's very good at doing things in parallel. The abundance comment from Ethan Mollock, very good at doing things in parallel. It's very good at reading handwriting, and so we can put it through. We can loop through those images, send it to Claude. That can go into a spreadsheet, can be reworked again. We can generate an image, and we have a pro forma that's much simpler to read, much more engaging, and much clearer than it would be if we were just using handwritten notes throughout the things. And it means that ideas can be processed more quickly, and we can use quicker feedback loops to keep these projects moving. Innovation is not just about ideation. It's also about change. It's about how we change people's perceptions. It's about how we can relate differently to objects. And I think Torchbox's recent work with London Museum is a great example of this. So we've been collaborating with London Museum not quite 2 years, but we've been working with them for a very long time. And we worked with knowledge integration in relation to this. And this was around leveraging artificial intelligence to better relate objects to things that are actually relevant. Because if we think about how machines traditionally work, the very deterministic 2 + 2 = 4 way of working that computers previously took, you end up with quite literal connections. So if I, as a user, have gone to look at a coin, the machine will just give me loads more coins, right? You like coins? I've got coins. Here are all the coins. But what we discovered workshopping with London Museum through the process of the website build, of their transformation, was that meaningful connections were a really important piece of the puzzle for them to be able to communicate to all of the user archetypes they were working with. So whether they were a knowledge seeker, inspiration explorer, or an experience seeker, they wanted to be able to create those connections. So if you land on a coin showing the head of Charles II, actually you don't want to see more coins. You potentially want to see something about Holland or the Glorious Revolution or Guinea, or any of the other things that could relate to that period of history. And I think this would have been possible in the past, right? But it would have required a huge amount of human interaction and effort, and it would have been difficult to maintain over time. What you'd have ended up was quite brittle connections. You may have been able to create those lateral connections to begin with, but as new artifacts were added to the museum collection, it wouldn't necessarily adapt as it grows. With that, I will hand across to Tom.
Thanks, Ed. I'm going to now show another kind of example of a co-creation exercise where the co-creation is between me and the machine. And before I start, I'll just say a little bit about the project, which is for Women's Aid, and it's a really fascinating and important project. And I think the way that we are going about it with their encouragement is just a different approach that we've taken in the past, and it's an approach that we were able to take because of some of the accelerations that are afforded by these new tools. And I guess in particular, creating working interfaces is difficult and expensive and requires skill, and that's why in the last 20 years at Torchbox, typically there's been a lot of upfront conversation and discussion and planning before you get into that stage. And then there's a sort of element of hope and risk and trust that that people like Torchbox will deliver it in a way that people like you hoped we will. And of course, we have systems for allowing us to iterate and improve and so on. But nevertheless, the upfront cost of building those interfaces has meant that it kind of happens. There's an initial investment. So we're looking at ways of reducing that investment and changing around this process so that actually, instead of spending a lot of time speccing and talking, then we do, of course, some talking, but also with some building really early on. We build working interfaces. At least that's what we're trying now. So I'm going to show that now. I'm going to share my screen. I have to replace the current share, which I'm going to do now. You should now be seeing my browser and a tool called V0. This is by a company called Vercel, hosting company. They specialize in kind of front-end web stuff. And V0 is a bit like ChatGPT or Claude or some of these other large language models, but it's focused on particularly on building front ends of web projects. It does it really well, and I think partly it's because it has that focus and those constraints that it's able to do better than some of the state-of-the-art models like Claude and OpenAI's ChatGPT. So the project, I start here with a description. So this is the kind of classic chat interface. You can see what I'm said here. I'm building an app. I've already made a simple API. I want to build a UI to help people search for these resources, should prioritize simplicity and speed. And I've written a couple of paragraphs here, which is perhaps more than you would typically write in a chat interface. But in fact, I probably could and should have done more, because the more detail and thought you put in early on, the better results you get. And I'll skip through some of the API spec, but then I'm going to click on its first iteration, and we've got the code and immediately the preview. And interesting, this preview is not an image. This is actually a working tool. It doesn't have the data yet, but it's JavaScript code that I can bring into my project. And it's a reasonable start. You can see here what some of the thoughts that the reasoning process. But it's looking a bit cold and clinical, and so my next question is to ask it to use some calm but friendly colors and a serif typeface to get something of the feel of the Claude site. And this is something I do a lot now. I take screenshots of things that I like or of designs that work, and I just paste them in. So I pasted that in, and it's done an update to include a calmer color palette, and immediately it's looking nicer. It probably looks a bit too similar to Claude, but this isn't a production output. This is something that we're just using as a tool between us and the client to think about, what's going to work for the users of this site. And then I go through several more iterations of this, and you could read the whole conversation, and you can also see. I can look back now and see all the different versions, but if I go straight to the final one, we get something that's solved some of the little glitches that I discovered along the way, has this nice scrolling interface, has live search, has a map view. And then a really interesting thing that's kind of hard to explain and probably not that relevant unless you're a developer, is this feature here where once I've iterated on this, so that's the kind of co-creation part, I then press this button, and it gives me this line that I can then use to pull it into my project. And so this is where it kind of can step from being this little prototype that I see to something that becomes part of a larger code base. So I did that, and I won't show you the part where I kind of bring it into the code base, but it's pretty straightforward. And from there, I go on to building to iterating further with another tool called Cursor to get to this live application. So this is the thing actually running now. It's got live search. It's really fast. I can do filters here, which change this interface straight away. I can select the different items, shows me where they are. I can heart them. So I don't know if you saw in my original description, but I wanted to get something that was like a mix of Airbnb and a shopping site. So hearting, this is showing an area that might be relevant for me. I can click more or less, and it adds to this counter here, like a sort of shopping basket. I choose that. I can manage them, or I can contact them. And so immediately from here, I can call or email. I can see the summary, and I can also press this button and go straight into my message, which is probably more realistic because actually it's going to be people at the end of a helpline who are going to be finding this data and then distributing it to the right people. And this is, it's a reasonably sophisticated interface. There's quite a lot happening here, even though it's only a couple of screens. the management of the data being moved from screen to screen, and the real-time search and the mapping. Putting points on a map is pretty easy. Areas, not so much. There's a lot of work here that would typically take, you know, weeks to get right. And this happened in a day. And I think probably the really interesting thing here is that although I can write code, I didn't write a line of code for this. I worked with the tool to write the code for me. And you still need to be able to understand code, because I can see the mistakes it's making, and I prompt it to improve it and fix accessibility and so on, and think about and I need to report back on errors that I see in the browser. But I think that gap will close as well. If I've got time, Lisa, have I got a couple of minutes for a bit more? Okay, so I'm going to just try a quick live demonstration to show you this in action. So we're going to get this back to V0, but instead of showing you one I made before, I'm going to start a new one. And got some notes here that I'm going to read out. So increasingly, I'm trying to use dictation to speed up this work and to kind of for that more immediate reaction. So I'm going to try that now. Build me a donations form for a fictional animal charity. There should be 3 options for monthly giving, priced at £10, £30 and £75. Provide some dummy text describing what each option could mean for the charity. Allow one-off donations too. Support gift aid. So that looks pretty good. Just need to put a comma in there. Provide some dummy text. Coaching me for charity. Now on support gift aid. Okay, so here's my prompt. And this is pretty minimal. As I was saying before, ideally, I'd think a bit more about what I'm about the backgrounds, just to help it give the best chance to start off with. Seeing now that it's building that code for me, it's given our fictional charity a name, Positive Impact. Generally, I find that large language models don't have great sense of humor, but they do. They're all right on puns. So we've seen the code, and we can also now see the preview, which looks pretty solid. So I can switch between monthly and one-off donations. I can toggle between the different versions. It's given me some example content, which of course I would want to fix, and a nice gift aid. And there's some good, sometimes, especially in the early days, these large language models, you felt like it was all very US centric, but increasingly, I think they're much more kind of geographically or sensitive. And here it's understood that you need to be a UK taxpayer. Still looks a bit boring. So let me say, let me spice it up a little bit. I'm gonna ask it to give it a neo-brutalist styling. I don't know if you're familiar with neo-brutalism in the context of web design. You might recognize it when you see it. It's this sort of, as it says here, bold colors, strong contrasts, raw, unpolished aesthetics, which probably isn't going to be relevant for Positive Impact, but is probably going to be a bit more striking, at least, and feel a bit less bland than the original one. So kind of interesting watching it spit out the code. But and here's our design. See that full screen? Not quite fitting in our screen, but yeah, definitely looks a bit more funky. So that's a short example of this kind of co-creation process, and it's a bit alarming to people like me who have I feel like, this my value has been wrapped up a lot in knowing the intricacies of Python and programming language, and now there's this sudden shift, and I think my value is going to be much more about understanding requirements and being able to express them in a way, and being able to close the gap between the outputs that the models make and what I think is right. And that's quite a quick and sudden shift for people like me, but I think it's one that I feel really positive and optimistic about, because the acceleration that it allows, and the fact that we can get to useful outputs much more rapidly. That's it for my demo.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was really insightful, and it is, I think, exciting and scary in equal measure for all of these things, and what it means for all of us. We've got some really good questions. There's obviously a lot of questions around ethics and sustainability, and these are always really key questions. And we're the same as Mike at Art Fund. We're trying to get to net zero, but we also want to have AI policies, and so there's a lot of questions around that. So I will start off with the first one. I'm just going to go through them in order. So first of all, it's a question about whether we have a policy in place at Torchbox about offsetting the environmental impact of using AI tools that require an outsized amount of data and therefore carbon, etc.
I'll make a start on this. We do have some pretty detailed and also public policies on our environmental use as an organization generally, which includes a lot technically, and we do a lot of detailed measurements on the impact of the sites and the apps we build and the servers that are hosting them and so on. It's a bit more opaque, to be honest, at the moment around AI tools, because we don't know the energy requirements that, in this case, the examples I was showing, even that's slightly hidden. I think it's probably Anthropic's Claude behind the scenes, and they're not sharing the energy and carbon impact per request in a way that would allow us to measure it. I think that will come. We've seen that, and particularly Google are really ahead in this space, and they are much better at publishing the data of their models, and I think there's going to be increasing pressure on that. One area that is more promising is the growth of or the improvement around open source large language models. There's kind of 2 or 3 which are at the top of the leaderboard at the moment, but that's constantly shifting. And if you have a relatively new laptop, especially Apple laptops happen to be good, the silicon chips in those happen to be really good for this. You can run a large language model now, which is roughly maybe as good as ChatGPT 3.5 was 18 months ago, maybe nearly as good as ChatGPT 4. And maybe not quite as quick, but not far off. And you can run that, and you can measure the energy that your laptop is using when you're running that compared to not, and that gives some useful indication. So, and for me on my laptop, it's a few watts an hour extra to do that, and that might sound a bit like roundabout, but I think right now it's hard to measure the impact. I think that will come soon if you use your own local models, or you self-host models, which is increasingly possible. Then you can measure it more, and then you can think about what the kind of the mitigations could be, whether that's offsetting or caching or reduction and so on. I think generally with these questions, it's quite hard to measure the impact, or at least when you're measuring that, you need to think about what the savings are as well. And a classic example is tools like Zoom that we're on now, where the data centers that run Zoom are using energy, but they're also allowing us to not get on a train or a plane, and so it gets complicated quite quickly, I think. But in the same way, I feel that the undeniable cost in climate terms from using expensive servers running somewhere, in some cases, is achieving things which themselves would have been carbon intensive. I'm sorry if that sounds like I'm trying to squirm out of the question, but it's not. I think it's an important one. It's one that we're wrestling with. I just don't think there's a really clear position that organizations can take right now.
No, and I think that's
one of the problems with it is that it's quite hard. You're comparing apples to oranges. To Tom's point, if you can do something 10 times quicker using a few more watts of power, does that offset it? The life cycle measurement of this is going to be very hard. Both Andy and I have been involved in physical product development and innovation in the past, so have done lots of life cycle analysis. This, I think, is going to be this is a nightmare to try and figure out, because you're not just taking this raw material versus this raw material processed in A way or B way. You've got, as Tom says, hidden data, but you're also comparing completely different processes to one another. So I think Mike from Art Fund has put the tension, and certainly I was workshopping with a charity this morning where essentially the entire most of the time was spent trying to navigate this grey area and this balance. I think Paul's got a really good point there, that it's through engagement that we're going to get to a solution. And I don't think we can ignore artificial intelligence. It's here, it exists. If we don't engage with it, we've got the strong chance of being left behind. It needs to be taken.
Paul's point as well is that, but it's going to continually get more resource efficient and climate friendly too. It's constantly getting better, and this is a big factor of that. Another ethical question that we had was, do you think there's an ethical mandate to label any use of AI in service of charity materials and assets in the same way that this is now a requirement when putting live paid ads and posts in platforms like Meta, if they include an AI component?
I can probably go with that one, Lisa. I personally believe transparency is the best policy, right? So if we're using AI in any of our content, we should be disclosing that, right? For anyone that's reading that content. And there's a lot of work being done in the space as well around even watermarking AI now in images and content. And I think I'd always advocate for being as transparent as possible.
I think the other bit to build on Andy, there is part of the reason we talk about having a human in the loop is essentially AI is useful within the process of making, but shouldn't be finishing the product. Tom was showing the prototype that is going out there. Actually, it will be a human that starts the process, the work with the thing, but then it is humans that finish the process. I think, but yeah, agree with Andy that it's around transparency.
This sounds a bit more sort of apocalyptic, but I'm really concerned about the slop is a word that's starting to be used now. AI slop, this sort of AI generated content that is filling the web because it's quick for commercial marketers to use this and to create pages that have great SEO and so on. But it's going to be this sort of terrible self-fulfilling thing where if we don't know which content has been generated by AI, then the AI tools in the future are going to use that content themselves, and we're going to probably converge on some terrible blandness, and also the systems will plateau because they need the new ideas and not the self-generated stuff. So we need to find ways of identifying AI generated content, and I think that won't always be easy, but as people who are publishing content, then I think it's absolutely the right thing to do to identify that in a ways that hopefully that future automated systems can understand.
There's a lot of confusion around it. I shared a video of myself talking to camera to promote this webinar yesterday, and my mum sent me a message and said, "Is that an AI version of you?" So there's a lot of confusion. So my mum actually doesn't know if it's me or AI because she thinks that she's questioning everything, basically, even her daughter. The next question we have is, how do you predict AI will help with creativity and ideas, not just execution? Or maybe it does somehow already. Andy?
I think it definitely does already, right? I think if you'd asked Ed or I think creativity is part of my role and my identity, right? we talked about loss and things like that earlier, but humans are still, from any of the studies that I've seen, way more creative than artificial intelligence. But artificial intelligence can amplify and build ideas, and we often use ChatGPT and creative prompts to be able to give us thought starters, right? Or when we get stuck or we're in a creative rut. So I think, again, it's not about AI or us, it's about working together with AI systems to be able to amplify that. Also, we can create, Ed showed you earlier with the BCN example, but we can elevate things now to a better quality much faster and see how an AI might bring that idea to life in a different way as to the way Ed or I might have done in the past. And I think that adds a lot of, I think it adds a lot to our approach and process. So I think it's about how you use AI and less about AI itself.
Yeah, I think it's going back to that Ethan Mollick comment on abundance, and we already saw it with Tom doing his demo, right? It got a very vanilla output first time, but he was able to quickly, iterate and get a neo-brutalist thing. And so it's like he could have gone back and said, okay, well, I'd like a material design version. He could have gone back, I want a Gov UK version, and then you could go back and say, I want a Baroque Renaissance punk thing, and you'd have had suddenly 5 different versions of a thing in what minute, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And so suddenly you can ideate around these things much, much quickly. And I think it really helps the creative process. The other place I think it certainly helps my creative process is by challenging weaknesses in what I'm doing. So, deliberately going with these are the ideas, what's wrong with them, how could they be made better, what can you challenge on them, and it helps you think about, oh, okay, yeah, I did miss that blind spot because. So I think it's invaluable there for creativity.
Yeah, the act-like function we talked about before as well, Ed, right? So looking at a challenge from multiple different points of view based on what it's learned from the data set can really unlock, new creative avenues. So, act like Lisa, act like Ed, act like Tom, thinking from that perspective, just not to name other people outside of this room, put them on the spot. But I think that's really helped with that divergence.
Yeah. I'm just going to squeeze in a couple more questions because we've got some good ones. It builds on the design aspect of it. How do you find AI dealing with principles around accessible design? So it might be able to make it fancy, but is it accessible?
I'll just handle that quickly from a technical point of view. So I think this is a strength. So there are a few tasks in software development that are often, this shouldn't be the case, but it is, that are often left to the end and can be nice to have. So that could be like documentation, writing tests, making it accessible, making it sustainable. And these are some of the things that LLMs are really good at. So writing tests and documentation is fantastic. Also making it accessible. In fact, the examples I showed you, they're all using this fairly new component library called ShadCN, which has got accessibility really built in. So you know that the fundamentals are in place. Of course, that's not the same as doing proper accessibility testing and understanding the needs of your specific users and so on. But from a technical point of view, it gives you a basis that is probably higher than the levels we had in the past.
Yeah, I think to build on Tom, that ShadCN, building on top of Radix, those primitives are really helpful from a web accessibility point of view. There's lots of things about text inputs, about checkboxes that you just don't think, dialog windows, all of that stuff in terms of making it keyboard accessible, and all those pieces that are out of the box in terms of being able to use those frameworks and moving us forwards. And I think the other bit, again, it's around abundance, right? It's about pushing it to, okay, actually, I now need it to be AAA. What does the WCAG AAA color contrast look like versus the initial color palette that we might have been thinking of as designers? And all of those, super interesting.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. We are at time, but I've saved all the questions that we haven't got to answer, and I will answer them in the follow-up email for you all. Thank you very much, Tom, Andy, and Ed, for your time today. If you have opted in to be notified of our future events, we are planning more innovation webinars for nonprofits, so you will get a notification about those. We've also got an in-person, quite small breakfast event in January for directors of innovation. So we'll share more of that as well. But thank you very much for coming, everybody. We hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.